Hi, I'm Malika Bilal, and you're in the stream. Today, deadly protests along the border of Gaza and Israel, and Palestine's poetry of resistance. We'll talk to Palestinian poets about creative forms of protest. First, we go to our correspondent, Hoda Abdel-Hamid, who is in Gaza City. She's been covering the protests along the border of Israel and Gaza. And you at home can join our conversation via Twitter at AJStream or through our YouTube chat room. Hoda, welcome to the stream. Israeli forces have killed at least 52 Palestinians. That's the latest death toll. Those protesting in Gaza along the border, they fired live ammunition, tear gas, fire bombs. What was it like witnessing the events of today?
It was actually surreal, if I may use that word, simply that because we were standing there looking at the protesters. Yes, the Israelis had warned that they will have a zero-tolerance policy. They had dropped leaflets yesterday warning people to keep away from the border fence, but they really started shooting very early in the morning, even when there weren't many protesters and they were just burning tires not very far from the fence. Yes, but they were not trying to reach that fence. And then throughout the day, we just saw one ambulance after the other. It was a continuous stream. We even, at a certain point, moved away from the border fence and went to one of these first aid tents, and it was relentless for the medical staff there. Now they have these tents to sort of make a triage of the injured who need to go to the hospital because they're in bad conditions, and those who can be treated on the spot, simply because the medical system here in Gaza is crumbling. Just a few weeks ago, it had already declared a state of emergency. So it was tough, difficult. The youth were there, defiant, resilient, and you would look at them. Some of them were so young, and you could see in their face that this fear, their fearlessness, the fact that they didn't mind if they were going to get wounded or if they were going to die, was just a sign of how desperate they are.
I pulled up this tweet here that we got from a former stream guest. This is Omar Gharaib, who says, "Hearing updates while we are on our way to donate blood. It's surreal. I feel numb. So many people killed and injured here today. You can smell death in the air. The streets are empty, and Gaza is sad." Can you relate to what Omar is writing here in his tweet?
Yes, absolutely. It was very sad, especially when you go to these medical tents. And I've covered the protests at the beginning, the first 2 weeks. And when you went to hospitals, I mean, it was a lot to take in. It was, sometimes it felt like someone had just punched you in the stomach. All these young people maimed. Some of them had their leg amputated simply because they are in Gaza. If they were somewhere else, they could have gotten the treatment they wanted. If it wasn't that they were in Gaza and things were so complicated, they might have been able to travel to Egypt or to the occupied West Bank to get treatment there. But they are in Gaza and they have no way out. And I remember very well one doctor talking to me, and he was very emotional. He was containing his tears, and he said, "Sometimes I feel helpless. These people should not be suffering so much because the degree of injury they have is, yes, very serious, but it could be treated if Gaza was a normal place." And then he said, "But this is not a normal place." And he was really shrugging it off. He did not know what to do.
I want to share a visual example of that juxtaposition that you're talking about, that this is because these people are in Gaza, and if they were someplace else, they might have been able to get more help. This is Patrick Gailey, an AFP photographer, and he shares two photos from the AFP posted today, May 14th. Left Jerusalem, right Gaza. Pictures taken at the same time this afternoon. And on the right-hand side, you see protesters, one passed out, and people carrying him in Gaza. On the left-hand side, you see the daughter of President Trump, Ivanka Trump, standing next to Steve Mnuchin at the official opening of the U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem. Both of these taken at the same time. Were protesters there aware what was going on in Jerusalem, and what's the connection between those two events?
Well, certainly today's protest was called to coincide with the opening of the U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem. The protesters were not following what was going on in Jerusalem. They probably didn't see hear the speeches and seen the grand pomp of the inauguration, but they were angry at it very much. Anyone you ask would tell you, I'm here because of the U.S. Embassy. Jerusalem is our capital of a future Palestinian state. That is, ask any Palestinian, they would tell you that, whether they're in Gaza or in the occupied West Bank or indeed in Jerusalem, and even those living inside Israel. So everybody was aware of the fact that this was happening, but no one was seeing or watching television or listening to what was unfolding over there. Us journalists, we were, me and Stephanie Decker, my colleague, we both had the audio return, at least, of what was happening in Jerusalem. And I have to say that we discussed it later this evening, and Stephanie even reported on that. It was very difficult to take in because on one hand, in one ear, we were listening to all these speeches that we heard I think it was the American ambassador saying that this was a great opportunity for peace. We heard all these remarks. And then on the other side, we were watching young people being shot at. I mean, they were throwing stones, they were burning tires, they were flying kites. Some of them had petrol bombs, but at no point was any soldier in danger. Even those who managed to reach the fence and went there to cut it, to breach it, when they come back, they tell you, we know we can't get further, but that, just doing that for them symbolizes a sort of momentarily sense of freedom. That's how one young boy, a teenager, 16-year-old, put it for me. So it was quite surreal, and you could see this is such a divided part of the world, and with every day that passes, you just don't know how they will ever come together, if that will ever happen. And then, there's the rhetoric coming out that this is all organized by Hamas, that the 2 million Gazans are basically all terrorists. This is completely dehumanizing all these people, completely brushing aside the fact that you have at least 2 generations who have grown up under a blockade, who have seen nothing else but Gaza since they were born and don't know when they will see anything else, that you have more than half of the youth, even the university graduates, who are completely unemployed with no chance of getting a job, that you have people who actually have sold already all their furniture at home and have nothing more to feed their children.
Right.
That is what is happening at the border. It is not Hamas. You hear a lot of people complaining about Hamas. That's not what's pushing them to the border. Hamas, yes, has its rhetoric. Hamas, yes, has its own agenda. But Gazans, by and large, are fed up with all political faction at this stage.
Right. Hoda, I want to end with this tweet here from Musi, who says the U.S. administration must take responsibility for the killings. The U.S. government has been acting as a mediator between Palestinians and Israelis, but Donald Trump administration is jeopardizing the peace process. The whole world should condemn Israeli aggression and stand with Palestine. Just one view from our community. We're going to let you go, Hoda. Stay safe. We'll continue to follow this story from on the ground. Thank you for being with us. So what can a poet express about the plight of Palestinians? Palestinian poets have long used their creative skills to highlight experiences of dispossession, exile, living under occupation, and the resilience of their people. Today we'll hear more about the role poetry plays in Palestinian resistance. With us are three poets. In London, Rafeef Ziadeh, a poet, human rights activist, and third-generation Palestinian refugee. She's released 2 albums of spoken word poetry titled We Teach Life and Hadil. In Columbia, Missouri, Ibtisam Barakat. In addition to writing poetry, she is the author of 2 award-winning memoirs about growing up in Palestine, Tasting the Sky, A Palestinian Childhood, and Balcony on the Moon, Coming of Age in Palestine. And in Atlanta, Georgia, Mohammed El-Kurd, he is a university student and poet from occupied East Jerusalem. Welcome to the stream, everyone. Rafeef, I want to start with you. You heard what Hoda had to say at the top of the show. As a Palestinian poet who writes about resistance, how do you make sense of the resistance and then the reaction that we've seen along the Gaza-Israel border?
Well, today has been a really devastating day. We've just been watching the death toll rise. I think people in Gaza are so courageously saying enough is enough. We deserve to live in freedom. We deserve to live in dignity. And importantly, we deserve to go back home. The majority of the population in Gaza, as you know, are refugees. And the point of this march is not just against the siege, but it's also to speak of the right of return. That is something very dear to my heart as a third-generation Palestinian refugee, something that I speak about quite often. I think what today really brought out is the fact that the Palestinian Nakba is ongoing. Since its inception, Israel has been displacing Palestinians and continues to displace them. The big question on my mind is, what is the international community going to do, and how far does Israel have to go? Today, we witnessed a televised massacre of unarmed civilians being shot at. How long does this have to happen before more countries do what South Africa has just done and pull their ambassadors, and before we have military embargoes on Israel?
Mm-hmm. I hear what you're saying there. Ibtisam, I could see you having a really, a visceral and visible reaction to the scenes that we're seeing, that we saw from earlier today. And I know that this is difficult for so many of our viewers, and of course, including our guests who are tied to this issue so intimately. What's going through your mind?
Mm-hmm. There are certain things that cannot be expressed in words. They're just so, language hasn't caught up with what the Palestinians go through. Language hasn't developed enough to express the depth of the loss and the devastation on the inside, and what must be said for the Palestinian to communicate to the world and be heard. So far, we communicate and we're not heard. So for me, there's the Nakba, of course, which has been going on for 70 years and 1 day. And that's a geographic and a national, political, and a life Nakba. But there's also an emotional Nakba as well that is happening with all of the Palestinians all over the world. And we don't have a place to express it. Poetry is just a tiny oasis where we can express some of that Nakba and have an opportunity to heal. And with tears, I'm reminded of my humanity and that I'm alive, and I connect with my people who are in Gaza crying right now. I doubt it that anyone in Gaza who's not crying. Mm.
Of course, you mentioned the Nakba for our audience that is not familiar, although if you watch Al Jazeera, you are familiar. That Nakba is the day that Palestinians refer to as the catastrophe, literally. And this is when more than 750,000 Palestinians were forcibly made to flee to the exodus out of their lands.
It's like actually 500 villages and towns were emptied, and massacres were committed in order to force people to flee. So like a whole country, we're talking, it's not, actually the figure 750,000, this is a very conservative estimate of the United Nations. Mm-hmm. But what happened is an entire country was emptied eventually for Palestine to be removed from the map and Israel to be put on the map. A whole people have been displaced, a whole country has been destroyed. And in the before and after, what might have happened other than ethnic cleansing and genocide and destruction? I mean, how could a country be taken off the map, another put on the map, you can only imagine what happened in between, and you can understand it from what's happening in Gaza right now. It's just the same thing. People being, yes, destroyed, families destroyed, whole cities burned. And in my opinion, which I really like to communicate to all of my audiences, that I cannot see the Palestinian experience in separation from the Holocaust. The Palestinian experience happened right after the Holocaust in order to move people outside of Europe and give them a national home. Basically, the Holocaust has moved land, it moved language, it moved hands, but it continues. A people were facing genocide in Europe, and now a people facing genocide in Palestine with the same forces at play, actually, the Europeans, the United States, and the Jewish people. And it's just, it changed places. And that is the larger perspective I like to communicate, because we're part of humanity, and often we're separated from humanity, like, okay, this is the problem of the Palestinian. No, this is not the problem of the Palestinian. This is the problem of humanity that created a genocide against the Jews, and now supports, allows, and waits for 70 years before something happens. They waited for 6 million Jews to die before that, and now 70 years and 1 day, the waiting happening. And my question is, until when the waiting will continue? Until when?
Ibtisam, powerful words. I want to share this tweet from Noura Arakat, who writes, "There is a massacre in Gaza today. That is its own headline, not a spectacle to complete your stories on the embassy move in Jerusalem. For Palestinians, this is all an ongoing Nakba, not the end, the beginning, or the middle of a farcical peace process." And Mohammed, I want to turn to you with that, because there's a special significance for you as well. You were born on the 50th anniversary of the Nakba. So now that we are reaching the 70th, what significance does this hold for you? How are you marking this anniversary?
Every birthday that I've had, and especially today, has been a reminder that the Nakba is not yet nostalgic. It is not yet an opportunity for reminiscing. It's not in a museum. It is ongoing. And today has reminded me that death in Palestine is constant and instant, and it happens like in between breaths. I called my family and I asked to see if they were fine and safe, but nobody can be safe regardless of where you are in Palestine. Now, I am so moved by the courage of the people in Gaza, and how resilient and powerful they have been to go about such things and to face such things and to be so confrontational with death. Just means how much they are lustful for life. Nobody would go face to face to death unless they were so close to it already. And these people have no resources, no freedom. They are living in an open air prison. And the only reason they are erupting this uproar is because they yearn for freedom and dignity and human rights and equality and their right of return. We are done being refugees. We are done being headlines. We are done being statistics.
Rafeef, I know that you are a third-generation refugee, and I know you also have written a poem about the Nakba. I'd love if you could share your poem with our audience.
Well, actually, the poem I had in mind for today was more around the events of today, because I saw how various mainstream media were reporting, and they would just say Palestinians died, as if it just happened, as if Israeli snipers weren't there doing it.
Please, go ahead.
So it's called A Place. Is there a place we can be? Is there a place we can be more than thunderclaps and hashtags? Our fears are not Twitter storms, our flesh not dissected in comment sections. Is there a place where we can hold each other in sorrow and silence, in defiance, before you make a picture funeral to share? Is there a place where headlines don't hate us, or assume we die mysteriously, just fall, and are never killed intentionally, by soldiers taking orders intentionally, by snipers taking aim intentionally, by weapons purchased intentionally, by countries that are selling war intentionally? Is there a place where headlines don't hate us, and our life, like our laughter, is intentional? Is there a place I don't have to justify that our lives also matter, that we also love our children? Is there a place where the breaking news, like breaking waves, doesn't just bring more bodies? Is there a place where we can just be human and return? Just a place.
Thank you so much, Rafeef. that was haunting and beautiful. It sparked this comment from Barnaby Jones watching us live on YouTube. He says, this is very similar to the Irish situation. In times of war, they turn to art, poetry, and song to express the pain of being oppressed. Ibtisam, when we talk about poetry, it can seem to some as trivial and not worthy of a discussion on a day like today. How do you make sense of those two things? And is that the place that you turn to make sense of events like today?
It's not trivial at all. Poetry is not trivial. This is how the Arabs survived since the beginning of time. Poetry is the gift of the Arabs since the beginning of time. So poetry elevates and also keeps the human being alive. Generally, at times like this, people shut down. And when a person shuts down, they don't have access to their feeling. When they don't have access to their feeling, they're closer to death. Whether they continue to breathe or not, they're closer to death. When a person continues to breathe through art or through poetry, they're closer to life. They're more able to respond intelligently and creatively. For instance, I can show you, since Rafeef just read a poem, I'll show you a little piece of art that I have that inspires me.
Please do.
It's actually a war piece of art. This is an origami tank. It's a paper tank, origami. Actually, an American artist who went to the war in Iraq creates these tanks. And I got this tank, and he had like a cannon in it. And I put a pencil in it and turned this tank from a piece, like a weapon of destruction, to a weapon of creativity. The cannon now in my mind says, I can go on. And the pencil shoots, instead of destructive things, it shoots words that maintain hope. So it's more of like a bird. And instead of the Merkava, which is like 60 tons on the ground, killing the ground, this is just a few ounces and it can fly. It's so important for me to use my creativity to take the elements of the oppression and turn them in my mind so I can grasp them and interact with them. Whether it's poetry, where the language that is targeting us, excluding us, disconnecting us, I can give it more life, I can nurture it and bring it back to life, the language, so it expresses me. Because generally the language is attempting to keep me on the outside. The political language aims to keep me on the outside. The poetic language constantly brings me home to humanity and the rest of the people. But poetry is not enough. This is a catastrophe, and a poem can do some things.
Right.
I use paper, I use art, I use painting, I use my tears, I use relationships, I use everything to stay alive, because the occupation has one goal. It's for us not to remain alive, for us to die and disappear, and only for the land to remain and the land to be taken.
Ibtisam, when you mention political language versus poetic language, it reminds me of something I'd like to share with our audience before we go. Sure. When we speak of resistance, people might think of images like today's protest, but perhaps another recent case should come to mind as well, and that's of Dareen Tatour, a Palestinian poet convicted this month by Israel for inciting violence and supporting what a court called terrorism. She published a poem on social media titled, "Resist My People, Resist," and now she's facing up to 5 years in prison. This is what she told the stream.
في المحاكم الإسرائيلية ما في عدالة، وهي جزء لا يتجزأ من الاحتلال، فعمليا ما كنت متوقع شيء ثاني منهم. من وقت الاعتقال لحد الآن أنا جهزت عندي كتاب ديوان شعر كامل جاهز للطباعة وللنشر بعد الحكم طبعا، لأني أنا في الوقت الحالي ممنوع أن أنشر، لكن ما توقفت بالكتاب لحد قبل أسبوع كتبت قصيدة. ما في أي شيء رح يمنعني إني أستمر في مشروع الكتاب اللي أنا بلشت فيها. الكتاب لأنه هي حياة بالنسبة لي ومنها فترة من حياتي وماركة، فأكيد رح أكمل الكتابة وراح أنشر كتاباتي بعد مباشرة بعد الانتهاء من الحكم.
Mohammed, we have just about 30 seconds left, but I saw you nodding your head there. What are you thinking?
Just to point out that when Dareen was arrested, about 400 other people were arrested in 2015, 2016 for Facebook posts, and this is not only a violation of basic human rights of free speech, but this also attests to say that there is a narrative here that is being manipulated.
Mohammed El-Kurd, I have to stop you there. Our thanks to you, Ibtisam Barakat and Rafeef Ziadeh. Thank you for being here on the show today. And this story, of course, will continue with #AJStream. We'll see you online.